So my name's Jack. I discovered Winston's Wish when I started to get into my running, and I got into the running and really wanted to try and give something back, something that meant a lot to me. And so I started looking up cancer-related charities and child bereavement charities, and I found Winston's Wish. And I read a bit about you, and I really liked some of the work that was going on, and it felt like something that possibly I hadn't really been a part of when I was growing up, something that I think I would have enjoyed to be part of. And so I decided to randomly just raise money for Winston's Wish, even though I hadn't had much of a connection with them before. And it led to really some amazing things because everyone was really supportive, and people at Winston's Wish were encouraging me to tell my story about what I'd gone through, about, quite a difficult journey of suppressing what I went. I didn't really face my grief for a very long time. And it was the first time in my whole life that I started sharing my story. Literally for 10 years before, I couldn't even say the word dad or think about the word dad. And then suddenly I was, putting posts on social media saying I'm raising money in memory of my hero. And I've got an upcoming marathon that I'm going to do. And, that's what I want to do it for Winston's Wish, to try and raise money. And that really helped me begin the process of healing and accepting my grief, because I was finally talking about something that I buried for so long. I'm very lucky because my dad was my hero, and he did so much for me in the 14 years that I had him, and it all happened very quick. We'd just been on this amazing holiday in America, and then we came back and he started to get a little bit ill. I think as a child looking up at your dad, who's your hero, you don't really think dads can actually be ill. So I didn't really accept the fact he was ill, and quite quickly after Christmas he just deteriorated. And I was actually on a school trip, and I got a call saying I had to come home straight away because Dad didn't have long left. And even though I knew he was ill, I still couldn't comprehend that he could possibly die. And they said, no, you've got to come back now because he's going to die and you've got to say goodbye. So I got home and I was very upset, and I saw him in the hospital bed, and he significantly changed a lot in a very short amount of time. I could see his bones basically through his skin, which, considering he was my big, strong hero, was really hard to take. I walked in and he didn't recognise who I was. He just said, who are you? And as a 14-year-old boy, I couldn't really understand how the guy who had done so much for me didn't know who I was then. And then he died very quickly after I said my goodbyes, but it didn't really feel like I was saying my goodbyes because I didn't really feel like he was hearing me. And then I went to school, and I went to school really quickly because I didn't really want to accept what had happened. I was a bit embarrassed. I didn't want people to really talk about me. Completely irrational thoughts, like I didn't want to be known as the kid whose dad had just died. So I went into school, and in my first class in front of 30 people, my teacher asked me why I hadn't done my homework. And it was sort of at that moment then where I was just like, okay, something major's happened in my life, because I had to admit in front of the whole class that my dad had just died. And I think that was the beginning of my quite tough journey with trauma, really. It was a very traumatic stage in my life, and it wasn't my dad's fault that he didn't recognise who I was. He was very ill. That's the realities of cancer and chemotherapy, and it wasn't my teacher's fault at all, because the teacher didn't know. They had no idea. They just thought I'd just been a naughty kid at half term, hadn't done my homework, and I completely understand that. That was really just how it happened. It was really quick, and suddenly I'd gone from spending 99.9% of my life with Dad, because Dad was my whole life, and suddenly that was just taken away in an instant, and it was really tough. I think in your teenage years you're at a very challenging age, because so much is going on in your life and you're still learning, and you're looking for that guidance and stuff. And I think when I lost that, it hurt so much that I couldn't think about it. I didn't want to talk about it, and that in a way pushed me back quite a bit. I was very lucky because I've got a very strong mom who looked after me, but there's only so much, you need to do some stuff for yourself. You need to reach out and look for that support. But I was a bit embarrassed, and I always think if someone was struggling, I think it's really important to get out and talk, because it is hard losing, it's really hard losing a parent as a child, because you not only are you suffering the loss and the hurt, but you're also suffering the routine of seeing them every day, and you're also losing that guidance that you should have. And I think if I had just spoken about it earlier, that maybe I would have processed it a bit earlier. Things got really hard for me because I completely closed it off and if you close off your dad, at 14 to 21, you're going to close off your whole childhood because it hurt too much to think about him. So I couldn't even think about the positives of my childhood. So I lost so much of my life, really, that if I just took a step back and spoke about it, that maybe I would have been able to process it quicker. And, you know, I've found that just going on autopilot and, you know, especially when you're late teenagers, you know, just going out and getting drunk and sort of forgetting about the consequences of what you're doing and your life, that it suddenly does get really hard. And I think just talking is probably the first step you can do. But I also think finding your outlets, like something that was really important for me was finding running, and I got into music and I taught myself guitar and I taught myself how to sing. And I started writing songs, and that was a different way of me talking, because even now to friends and family, I don't find it easy to talk about it, and I don't want to talk about it often, obviously, but I can talk about it well if I need to, which I think is really important. And I think it was just going through those processes and learning how I can process my grief was probably the best way forward. The music was never really in my family or anything, and neither was running really. So the hobbies I sort of found myself. Because I heard a Bob Dylan song, and I never heard Bob Dylan before, and his lyrics, and there was just something about the song where I felt relatable, and I felt like, you know, maybe without that father figure, I suddenly found some words and lyrics that really stood out to me. So I taught myself the guitar, and it made myself want to sing. And then when I got to a standard where I could start to write songs, I started to maybe write about some of the stuff that was inside that I'd never spoke to anyone about before. Because for some reason it was easier for me to express it that way, because I wasn't saying, oh, you know, my dad died. It was more like poetic and also more literal as well. I was talking about the literal side of things as well. And that really helped, because it was like I was telling my stories in a way that I found easier to tell. And they took on a life of its own, and some of them ended up on BBC Introducing. And then one of the songs turned into a play in London about grief. It was just really important for me to finally release what was inside, and stuff that I hadn't really thought about, that until I sat down with a pen and paper and started writing these songs, it was like, wow, I've completely forgot about that. I've completely suppressed my dad's memory. You know, I told him I'd never forget about him on his deathbed, and I did forget about him because it was too hard to think about him. And then I started writing these songs, and it felt like he was coming back into my life. And I think finding the outlets that work for you is really important, because I'm a private person and I've always been quite quiet, but suddenly I had a guitar and I could sing, and it was just a really good way to try and express myself. And that's how I think music really helped me through it. Running genuinely completely changed my life. Like, I got into it quite late in comparison to the level I've been able to reach, which I put down to the fact that I don't view myself as a victim of childhood trauma. I view it more as a superpower, and running really, really helped me reach that potential. So I originally just started running because I wanted to raise some money for charity. I hated the first few times I ran. I really, really hated it. It was hard and it hurt, but I got through that and I did the marathon and I raised loads of money and I was really happy with it. And I've been sharing my story online, and for the first time in my life, because I was sharing my story, I was hearing people I've not spoke to in years say to me, oh, you know, your dad will be so proud of you. And I think there's something about, you know, when a child losing a parent, when you hear that someone's proud of you, it's probably the most touching thing you can hear. And that really resonated with me. And then running just took on a new life. It wasn't just about raising the money. It was helping me clear my head, and it was helping me process my thoughts. And I do believe for a long time after Dad, I was very much in autopilot, where I didn't really think about the past, I didn't think about the future, I was very much in the present. And then I started to run, and on my long runs, I started to think about everything I've got, really appreciate how great my life is. And, you know, I've found the most amazing partner in the world. I've got, you know, the most amazing mom in the world who was so strong through everything. And running really made me appreciate everything that I've got, and it was good physically and mentally, but it also helped shape my life as well. So I stopped going out and drinking as much because I wanted to get better at running. And then I started to win races, and I started to break course records, and the people I was competing against, you know, I talked to them and they'd been doing it their whole life, and I'd only been doing it, you know, maybe my mid-20s, only taking it really seriously as I approached 30. And it's really become such a big part of me now. And whenever I do it, whenever I do these races, or if I win something or I get a PB, I've got my dad on my chest. I like to wear my running top that says "for my dad" or "for your dad," and it's really, it just reminds me of everything. And I feel like in a weird way through running, it keeps his spirit alive, because I feel like I've only excelled in it because of him. But I always feel like I'm carrying him on my sleeve, and he's in my heart when I'm doing it. And it's just been so important for me. And I think finding that outlet has literally changed my life. When Dad died, my way of coping was I just completely blacked it out. I couldn't think about the word or say the word Dad. I wasn't healthy. I genuinely had no goals, and I really didn't think about tomorrow. And I was in a very self-destructive mode where I didn't really look for happiness. And I surrounded myself in environments that just weren't me, which isn't good for me. But then I found my wife now, and she just made me, everything was so different. It's like I fell in love quite quickly, and she really helped me realize what happiness was, which I hadn't really thought about what happiness was before, because I was just going with it. I thought I was happy. I thought going out and getting absolutely drunk out my head all the time was a good idea. And then I realized suddenly that's not happiness. But then I started to be really happy when I found Sarah, and I started opening up feelings that I probably had shut off for a while. And then suddenly, for whatever reason, I came in from work one day and I hugged my little cat called Milo, and he was a really sweet little boy. And he used to give me a little hug whenever I came in. And I just, for some reason, I put my keys on the table, and I started like bawling my eyes out, and I couldn't stop. And the anxiety that I was feeling just hit me with everything, and it hit me like a wrecking ball. And I'd never really felt anxiety before. And suddenly I was thinking about everything. I was thinking about when my dad didn't recognise me on his deathbed. I was thinking about having to announce in front of 30 children why my dad had died. I was thinking about all the really challenging years that followed, where I was in environments that I didn't want to be in at all. And everything hit me, and suddenly I was clouded with this horrible guilt that I'd completely shut off my hero. And I'd completely lied to him on his deathbed when I said I'd never forget him, because I had forgotten him for 10 years. On the day I spread his ashes, I didn't take it seriously. It was just, it's just another day, and I'd love to have that time back. And it was all hitting me in one moment. So suddenly I was trying to process the last 6 or 7 years in one moment, but also my whole childhood that I couldn't really think about. And then luckily my partner came in, and she just hugged me, and I didn't really know what to say. And I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I just got really upset. And all she said was something like, "It's all right, don't worry about it." And it took a long time to get through what I was going through. And even though I was at my happiest, I actually felt the worst I had in my life, because it's like I'd opened everything up and I'd realised what I'd gone through. And that's when I started to get into running, and that's when I started writing songs, because it was finally at the point where my body and my mind was like, right, you need to start to process what's happened 10 years ago. And I did come out so much stronger, and I'm so glad for it. And then suddenly I could start like talking about Dad again, and I could celebrate his life, and I could wear his name on my shirt, and I could talk about him and share his story and raise money in his name. And it was a really scary moment. And if it hadn't been for my mom, it hadn't been for my brother and my wife and my cats, I don't think I would have got through it. And that just shows how important support is, because even though grief hit me 10 years later, it was a dangerous amount that it hit me, and I needed that support around me at that time. And I think that's why it's so important that people look out for, whether that's friends or family, whether that's Winston's wish, whether that's however they want to let it out. It's just very important that you have that support around you when it does hit you.